Hello there. Thank you for joining us today as part of Nufarm's virtual learning series. I'm Bethany Allison, Customer and Brand Marketing Manager for Nufarm. Today, I'm excited to introduce to you Dr. Dan Beran, U.S. Technical Services Director for Nufarm, as he takes us through the product review and technical summary of Champ Dry Prill.
Thanks, Bethany. Again, my name's Dan Beran. I'm the Tech Service Director for Nufarm. And today we're going to be talking about Champ Dry Prill, one of our key copper products in our portfolio. So a little bit about Champ DP or Dry Prill. It is like our other Champ copper products built on copper hydroxide. That's kind of our foundational copper salt that we build our products on. And the reason we like the copper hydroxide, it's a modern form of copper used for agriculture. It's going to release the copper ions, which are the active ingredients, in a real time measured, consistent way, so that provides the type of control that growers and producers are looking for out of a copper fungicide or bactericide. So the Champ Dry Prill obviously is a dry product, and it's loaded at 57.6% copper hydroxide. And so when we talk about the salt, that's important, but really the number that I like to look at, and that's important to consider when comparing to other formulations, is this metallic copper equivalent. So the copper hydroxide in Dry Prill equates to 37.5% metallic copper equivalent. So that's basically the way of looking at the amount of active ingredient loaded in a pound of Champ DP. So 1 pound of Champ Dry Prill would provide 0.375 pounds of metallic copper equivalent. Again, those are the free ions of copper that are the active ingredients controlling bacteria or fungal pathogens. The other thing about this formulation that's popular and that was developed is to have a dry prill that would eliminate dust when mixing. And so, as you can imagine, any product that could be formulated as a powder could be prone to creating dust for handlers and folks mixing and blending the product, and the dry prill overcomes and virtually eliminates the dust. So that's one of the advantages to this particular formulation that's been very popular. It's a fast and easy product to mix. It's going to bloom well and perform well in the spray tank. It is formulated with polymers. That's part of the dry prill formulation piece, but these polymers also aid in the copper release. So this is not necessarily just on handling, but it also gets to kind of the biological attributes of Champ DP. Those free ions are going to release. The polymers are part of the formulation to help maybe attract and retain moisture, which then lends the product to the release of coppers, and those copper ions release onto the leaf and put them in an active form for the disease control that they're being used for. So a little bit about factors affecting the efficacy of copper products, because there are so many. One of the key pieces is the salt form, like we talked about with copper hydroxide being one that readily releases the copper ions. There's some other things in formulation technology that become very important too when it comes to the efficacy of these products. First of all is particle size. We'll talk a lot about these with our Champ brands, and the smaller the particle size is, the more effective the copper product can be. And part of this is we're not talking the size of the prills, but really the crystal or the particle size of the copper hydroxide that then breaks down and releases the free copper. And so that finer that particle size is, the less time it's going to take to completely cover and protect the leaf surface. So you can imagine you have these fine copper hydroxide particles as they land on the leaf and dry down after application. Then moisture comes into contact with these particles. Then those particles are releasing the active ingredient across the leaf. And so if you have a finer particle size, it's going to be spread more, and it's going to provide quicker release onto the leaf surface, making that active ingredient in an available form when bacteria or fungal spores come into contact with it. That smaller particle size also plays a role in rain fastness. Again, with smaller particles, there's going to be more surface area, and that will the more surface area of these particles will interact with the leaf, and that also helps with better protection on the leaf. There's just more of those particles interacting with the cuticle and being spread across, as opposed to being piled high and larger particle size that would be more prone to breaking and falling off the leaf and washing off after an application. So particle size is important, and as we characterize CHAMP DP relative to other comparable copper hydroxide products in the market, one of the things that you'll notice is CHAMP DP has a very small average particle size of 2 microns. You compare it to a product that has a similar load of copper hydroxide like Kocide 2000, the average particle size is much larger at 5.6 microns, or even Kocide 3000, which is a finer grade than 2000, but even it has a larger average particle size. And then you can characterize these not just by the average, but you can look at the overall distribution of particle size. So this is just saying that 90% of the volume of your CHAMP DP is going to be less than 3.6 microns relative to almost 8 or 12.5 for the Kocide 3000 and 2000. So as far as particle size stacks up, CHAMP DP is very comparable, if not certainly better from a particle size standpoint, to Kocide 2000, which is generally what it has been compared to based on the copper load that's in there. So another way to look at these numbers is not just the averages, but you can kind of graph them and look at kind of the bell-shaped curve. And so Kocide, or you've got Kocide here, the 3000, which does have a finer particle size than 2000. But again, really the CHAMP DP versus Kocide 2000 are kind of the two products that tend to get compared because of copper loads. The CHAMP DP has a nice narrow bell shape. It's not spread out. So that's kind of what those numbers tell you on the previous chart. This is just a way to look at that visually. And so certainly it stacks up quite well from a particle size standpoint, from an average as well as the distribution compared to the two Kocide products. So what does this mean when you look at it as under an electron microscope? This is it on a leaf surface. So you can see, yeah, there are some larger particles, but what this still is showing is, if you imagine these particles are sitting on a leaf surface with some dew or light rainfall, these are going to start to release the copper ions, and it creates that layer across the leaf. Relative to maybe a product that's going to have larger clumps, you can have these copper basically piled up, so you could have spots that may have better coverage of the copper ions and some spots that may be a little bit light. And so the smaller particles give you more even distribution across the leaf, which again is important because these are contact. Copper is contact in nature, whether it's interacting with a bacteria target or a fungal spore. So coverage certainly is important, and these are preventative. It's not a curative type of fungicide or bactericide. It needs to be in place prior to really the disease getting well into the leaf, again, because these products are not, copper is not going to translocate to any great degree into the leaf. In addition to kind of this particle size technology, there's also polymers included in CHAMP DP that help with moisture attraction and copper release. So a little bit again about copper hydroxide and the copper salts used in agriculture is that moisture is required to release the active ingredient, the true free ions, be it from dew, rain, or transpiration. So moisture is required. Now the polymers in the formulation do provide and attract some retention of water. So not only will it help with attracting water, but it'll retain some water, and so that helps enhance the release of copper ions and maybe take some of the swings of wetting and drying out. As you can imagine, with a moisture absorbing polymer, it's going to maybe prevent some of the wetting and drying. So you get more even release and more consistent release. Again, it's all based on, how can we get the coppers out there in an active form for disease control. Another attribute of CHAMP DP is the mixing and handling piece. This dry prill, as you can imagine, there's a lot of ways you can formulate dry products, and we're talking about small copper hydroxide particle size, but then if you were to just grind that product down into a fine powder, you could have a lot of dusting. And so what you do is you take those fine particles and you can build them into a prill that has less dust. And so that's what we're showing here in the picture, again, relative to a couple of other dry products, Kocide 2 and 3000. So the dry prill is able to maintain the copper hydroxide crystal size, But then the Prill that's built with those has that polymer technology as just well as the formulation product has less dust. And so you kind of get the best of both worlds. You don't have a fine powder that's creating dust, but you're still maintaining that ideal crystal size once it's mixed and sprayed and reaches this leaf target. Now with these Prills, one of the things too that comes into formulation technology is you can have a great Prill that doesn't promote dust off, but if you overdo it, you can have a hard formulation that doesn't suspend or disperse very well. And so here's some older formulations during the development of this product, but here's what we're looking at with the current DP formulation. It hits the water, it'll disperse well. And again, so you get the best of both worlds with that lack of dusting, but still maintaining good dispersion once it's mixed with water for spray applications. Another thing that over the years as Champ DP has been developed is we look at it relative to comparable Kocide formulations. Really, again, the 2000 is the one that it's mainly been stacked up to based on the amount of copper hydroxide and metallic copper in these formulations. So really, when we look at it, Champ DP has, as we've shown with the smaller particle size, it's a superior technology, certainly an alternative to Kocide 2000. And it's an established brand. That's one that's been used for several years. So certainly not a generic copper. It's one that's has been tried and tested. And really during the development time, Nufarm invests in a lot of trials looking at not only how it compared to Kocide 2000, but also 3000, which as some of these newer generation copper hydroxide products came out, they were looking at, can we reduce the amount of copper that are put out because of the smaller particle size? And so certainly during this development, we were looking at rates relative to Kocide 3000. We performed very well, but just to maintain for the Champ DP product, we kept the existing rate structure. So we're delivering the efficient levels of control along with the sufficient copper levels. Again, then you think of the tough disease, citrus diseases for one of the key markets for Champ DP. And so that was kind of the approach of Champ DP in this marketplace. Bottom line, though, is that Champ DP provides consistent and an economical disease control option in the world of coppers. So a little bit about the crops and target pathogens that are controlled by Champ DP. And you think of copper use in agriculture, certainly grapes and downy and powdery mildew come to mind. This is just a sampling, but again, a wide range of crops and diseases are listed. One of the things that I do like to point out is sometimes in the world of field crops, those tend to get obviously heavily dominated by a lot of synthetic fungicides. But again, there's not a whole lot of products available for controlling bacterial diseases. The other side is you see some fungal pathogens here under field crops, be it Cercospora or late blight or Septorian wheat. Nice thing about copper too is it provides a resistance management tool, or perhaps a rotational tool when dealing with some of the field crop diseases that maybe traditionally are being controlled with some of the synthetic fungicides. The tree market, certainly home for a lot of copper applications, given the application cycles and some of the more difficult bacterial diseases. Things like fire blight and bacterial spots are very common, and so having the copper products that fit these markets is really important to our customers. The vegetable market as well, a lot of bacterial diseases as well as things like downy mildew. And for any of you who have tried to grow tomatoes in the past, you certainly know the challenges of early and late blight. And again, copper can be a very important tool for resistance management and rotation as well. And Champ Dry Prill fits into that market very well. A little bit about use rate ranges by crops, and I'll just throw out a few here to kind of frame up the types of rates that are used with coppers and with Champ DP given its loading on the berry, vine, and hops crops. You'll see, generally kind of the low to mid-range rate, 1 1/3 to 2.67 pounds there for grapes. On field crops, again, kind of on the lower end of the spectrum. Sugar beets do get quite a bit of copper use for control of Cercospora, a really difficult disease, and many growers and applicators have come to realize that coppers are very important for resistance management. On the vegetable side, again, you can kind of see the rate range, generally lower end use rates on the vegetables. Again, we're dealing with more succulent or tender vegetation in a lot of cases when you think of things like lettuce and some of the cole crops. One thing to look at here with tomatoes, this is certainly all on the label, but do want to point out that the end use of the produce may determine the use rates that are there. So the fresh market tomato allowance is up to 2 pounds per acre of Champ DP, whereas the processing is at 1.4 pounds per acre. Up to the tree crops here, this is an area where you're going to see wide ranges in uses. And part of the reason for that is a lot of the post-bloom applications, for instance, in apple or almonds, in a lot of cases, you start pulling your rates back. Again, copper hydroxide will pretty consistently release its copper ions in a relatively quick fashion, and you just have to keep those rates down because of any potential for maybe russeting on your apples or some slight phyto, depending on the timing. And so those lower use rates are traditionally for kind of after the leaves are emerged on things like apple, whereas the higher end use rates are kind of dormant season, pre-bud break sort of applications when you would look at something like fire blight or other tree diseases. So again, wide use ranges on the tree crops, and it really depends on the time of year and certainly the pest. A little bit on Champ DP packaging. We've got some flexibility there between 8 and 20 pound bags. These things have been in the market for a long time. So again, just part of the package of the product certainly comes with handling flexibility with both the 8 and 20 pound packages, and they stack well, non-slip. So that's an important part as we look at, again, the logistics of some of these things are really important with a high volume product like copper. So just to summarize, Champ DP, when you think about it from the key characteristics, it's that average, it's very small average particle size of 2 microns. And we looked at the bell curves. It has a really nice narrow bell-shaped curve. So 80% of its particles are between 0.5 and 3.6 microns. That's digging way into the weeds on the science of it. But really what that gets to is it has a small particle size, which means it's going to cover the leaf well and release the copper ions in a way that is going to provide excellent disease control, be it for bacteria or fungal pathogens. Again, when we look at it relative to some of the comparable products, it's very favorable size on those particles compared to both Kocide 2000 and 3000. Again, this all gets back to coverage and impacts rain fastness and ultimately the performance of the product as a disease management tool. That dry prill formulation of Champ was specifically designed to eliminate dust, but we've also maintained good mixing and dispersion with this product as well. And then finally, the polymer inclusion is another separating factor in Champ DP to aid in moisture capture and copper release. All of these things come into play when we look at having a copper product that performs in a wide range of crops for a wide range of diseases. So I thank you for joining us here today. If you have any questions on Champ DP or our other products, feel free to reach out to me or your local Nufarm rep. We'll be having additional webinars on other copper products as well as other products in our portfolio. So again, thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to talking to you soon.